Shanice Jones Cameron here, and I am so excited to welcome you all back to the Her Guided Evolution podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Mireille Siné is our first interview on the podcast. I'm super excited to talk to her today. So a little bit about Mireille. Mireille Siné, MPH, is a certified running coach, a lupus athlete, and entrepreneur with skill sets ranging from exercise science to public health and outdoor education. Born in Cameroon and raised in Los Angeles, growing up in the city is what fueled her curiosity for community, movement, and health. After running for more than a decade, she decided to start her own coaching business with hopes of bringing others into the sport with guidance and support. Mireille is the first known Black woman to run from Boston to New York City and has been featured in publications from Runner's World, Outside Magazine, Hoka, Under Armour, and more. When she is not running, she enjoys reading, catching up on her shows, and playing with her adorable baby nephew. So everyone, let's welcome Mireille to Her Guided Evolution. Super excited to talk to you. Welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Of course, yes. So I just would like to start out and ask you to just kind of tell us your story. Like, how did you get into running? How did you become a running coach? And perhaps how did you start or enter into your specialty of working with individuals who have autoimmune disorders?
Yeah. I think with like any origin story, it's pretty multifaceted. And where I am right now is not where I thought I would be a decade ago. I was definitely on that sort of what I would call a traditional career path with I majored in exercise science because I wanted to be a physical therapist. I tried to go to physical therapy school, did not pan out. Went and I got my master's in public health because I love that topic even more. And I thought I would do like more public health work. And I was working in homeless services for a handful of years, and then that got me burnt out. And then there just comes a moment where you're sort of figuring things out, and you're like, what is it do I actually want to do, and why haven't I done it yet? And for that looked like run coaching to me, because I had already been running like X amount of years. It to me, it felt like kind of like the natural evolution. Having done track in high school and started doing like local 5Ks in college. And then when I moved back to LA, that's when I got sort of integrated in the running community here in Los Angeles. And it was like being witness to people that were constantly going after those like half marathons and those marathons, and learning what a training cycle was kind of fueled the passion for the sport. Really made me want to like dig deeper and see what I could do. And even in that time, I'm having this like intersection of, I also just got diagnosed with lupus in college. So I was like looking for a way to get back to health on my own terms. I learned that there are a lot of rules and regulation, especially in those early years of being diagnosed. It was very like doctor's orders, and not a lot of like autonomy. At least that's how it felt like for me. So running gave me that sense of autonomy again. It's like once I got the all clear to resume physical activity, I pretty much just went for it, even though it was starting from like ground zero. That's how it felt at first. It was just like learning how to walk again. Really, that's how it felt. Just like with the pain and frustration that came with like, I could do 5Ks easy a few years back, and now it was like 5Ks were the goal again. So that sort of like being on my own journey in that sense, and then having the community here in Los Angeles was a real powerful just like incubator for the runner that I would become. Like even till this day, I still sort of like credit the running community here for the runner I am. And then, the launching pad for that was like having gone through these various careers, having tried so many different things that like felt like a fit at first, but didn't really feel quite right. And then having like basically the courage, I'd say is the right word to use, to kind of branch off and do and start something on your own from scratch. No guaranteed results, and to still be here today, as a Black woman in the entrepreneurial space, and especially in the coaching space, where like I'm pretty sure I am not what people think about when they think of like a run coach. Like it's definitely a white Caucasian male, that's like maybe elite, maybe they're in college, and I did none of that. I'm not white, male, or any of that too, but it's like I want to bring diversity into this predominantly white professional. So it's a journey. It's been a journey.
For
Yeah.
sure. I really appreciate um, you kind of pointing out that entering into this space, starting something on your own, like that is tremendously scary as someone who is also, embarking on this path and has been on this path of, just launching my own thing, having a podcast, having a coaching business. Like, for sure, I think it's always commendable when anyone, but particularly Black women, like we start out on this path and decide, like, you know what, I want to do what I can to make the world a better place. No
Mm-hmm.
guarantees that it's going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
No guarantees that I'm going to be successful, but there's something in me that wants to birth this new creation. And so I think that that is always something that's very admirable. So I really appreciate you kind of leading us into the conversation with that. So I want to kind of take us back a little bit. So you said that you begin running? You said in high school, was it?
Yes, I
Running
did track and
track?
field. Yeah.
Perfect. What did you do in track and field? Did you do like distance running? Were you doing like, was it like a 200-meter dash
Yeah, no,
or?
I was very anti-distance running back then, to be honest. I was in there for the social aspect. My friends were doing it. And I was like, if I'm gonna be there, I'm gonna do the 200, I'm gonna do some hurdles. And that was it. I think the funniest story that I like to tell people is that like my high school was pretty small. It was a very niche school. To the point where we didn't even have like a traditional field like some of the bigger high schools had. So our warm up was running to our next closest high school to practice there and then running back. And that run there and back was just, I was like, it might have been like 2.5, maybe 1.5 miles. And even that back then, I was like, I don't think so. Like, let's just get to the, let's just get
Can
to
I
the fast stuff.
drive?
Yeah. I'm like, this is not for me. So and that switch didn't like the switch to distance didn't really happen until college because it's like now I'm taking these courses in like physiology and just fitness and anatomy and stuff like that. So learning what's going on behind the scenes when our body is like in that motion is really what made it fascinating for me. I remember I had one of our fitness courses where we were tested on our 5K time like very periodically, and so the whole goal over the semester was to like try and improve and try and PR in that. So I'd say that is what definitely got me at least thinking into just like, oh, I can actually run maybe 3 miles without stopping. Yeah, high
Mm-hmm.
school me was not about that life at all.
Well, that's really cool that it sounded like the setup of your track and field journey with having to run the distance to the other school is interesting to kind of think about that, kind of like opening the door for distance,
Hmm.
even though you were kind of resistant initially.
Yeah.
So you continued running when you got into college, you
Hmm.
said?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I was never good enough to like be on the school team and stuff, but I played a lot of like or I actually worked in like our sports and rec department, so that kind of kept me close to just sports and being able to help out with some classes. But yeah, like going to the gym, I really enjoyed going to the gym and just in general working out. And then having those running and fitness requirements that were attached to just basically my education was a big help also because it made me stay active in that time where like I was living the dorm life. You have like the dorm food, which is not the best,
Hmm.
and yeah, it was I didn't even know where I'd be if I didn't start running back then. But yeah, it turned like running for me became this thing that I could do on my own, even like pre-lupus, right? And it wasn't like I had a lot of running friends, at the time too. I think even back then, I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was like to find a running community. Like I was not tapped into that world. I knew nothing about like clubs and coaches and even like races for that matter. It was only like until I got well into that degree that I started looking at races that I could do and sort of like kind of test this fitness.
At one point, you mentioned that you said that you weren't good enough for, was it like kind of like the elite running, or was it like a particular team? How, maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, it's like when I was on the high school track team, like I was on there and you sort of just know that you're not going to move on collegiately. Like it wasn't an aspiration of mine. So I wasn't hurt when like it never happened. There was a lot of like what ifs, of course. Like once you do get to see what a collegiate team looks like, it's super cool. Like track and field at the collegiate level, it looks so fun. Our school's main sport happened to be baseball, so we were not big on the track team at all. But it's like to the sim it's like I also compare that to like when people hear about runners, they assume like all of us are out to be in the Olympics, and that is just not the case. Like if you're a runner, you sort of know how far you can go. And so for me, it was just like, yeah, it's not going to be collegiate. This is not going to be my career back then. But it's something that I like to do for fun. It's something that I found challenging. I was using the Nike Run Club app back then in college, and I'm gonna date myself here, but like my very first really good pair of running shoes had like the Nike Run Pod that you used to put in the sole. And if anybody knows what I'm talking about, they know how old that is. We're talking like
OG runners. Yes.
2009. Like they don't make this anymore. It's you maybe you find it on the dark web somewhere, but it's like that's where we were at back then. Yeah.
That's so funny. And I love how you just pointed out that, like, look, some of us know like we ain't going any further as far as like
No.
professional
No.
sport, but we're gonna keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important and something that I really want to kind of like flag and highlight here, because exactly what you said. I think a lot of people do assume that if I'm not running a 6 minute mile, then I'm not running and I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
runner.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, I ran a 10K in 2015 and I ran one half marathon. I trained and ran one half marathon. I'm proud of that one half marathon at the beginning of 2020, and I didn't get to officially run it because,
Shut down.
yeah, everything was locked down. But I ran the 13 miles around my neighborhood just to say I could do it. Okay,
Yeah.
just to say I could do it. And so I know when I got into running and when I was running, it was never like pace was just not something I was thinking about. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
can I make it these miles?
Mm-hmm.
Can I, push myself to meet this goal even though I was just sitting on the couch 4 months ago? So like that was kind of like my perspective. And so I really appreciate you saying that even though you knew running was not going to be something that you were necessarily going to continue with as far as like on a collegiate level or going to the Olympics, it was still something that you kept doing, despite maybe some of those like preconceived notions that many of us may bring into something like running, a sport that is kind of like inherently competitive.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, even though you knew like, okay, your girl is not going to be doing this in college, I am not necessarily trying to be an Olympian with running. I'm curious, what about running made you continue with it? And particularly, could you tell me that transition into distance running?
Yeah. I think running is one of the few things that the work becomes evident. It's you can't cheat it. There's only one way, and it's to go through it. Like if you are stacking up enough days, if you are stacking up the workouts, eventually you will get to where you want to go. And I can't think of an example of something that's more straightforward from like if you have a goal, this is what you do, and then you get to the goal. Like nothing else to it. So it's very easy to make a routine out of it. When I was training for like my first marathon, like I found my favorite part was like the consistency that it gave me and the way it grew my own sense of discipline. Like if I had looked at the training week and I knew there was a long run coming up on Saturday, like everything that happened before Saturday was geared towards making that the best run that I could have. So whether that was like trying to get enough sleep, eating right, strength training and recovering, it's just like you start to sort of think like, how can I best support my running? Not knowing, like, even well in the early days, maybe not knowing that what you're doing to best support your running is actually supporting your life, like in general. Like it doesn't it's not as obvious in the beginning because you really are just kind of focused on like getting through the training cycle, making it through the race and finishing. But like the more you do it, or the more you actually like take that big picture view, running actually ends up making so many different parts of your life just a little bit better.
As a researcher, because of course I'm a researcher, and I study Black women's health, Black women's health and well-being discourses on the internet. And one of the findings that I found from the study that I recently published about Black women runners was that this idea that running was an anchor practice. And that's like a theoretical term that I use to describe how a lot of Black women runners talked about how running in particular helped all of these areas of their life. So an anchor practice is like that one kind of activity that is maybe related to one particular dimension of health, but it simultaneously like improves other areas of your life. So I think for anyone who's listening and who never really considered running, because as we talked about, kind of like that preconceived notion of I'm not trying to do this professionally, or I'm not running a 6-minute mile, so that means I'm not a runner. I really appreciate this perspective of it's not really about pace. It's not really necessarily about competing with the next person, although it can be, I'm sure, a sport, it can be, but it's also running is this practice that kind of sounds like it anchors you into your life, like helping you eat a certain way and set a goal, and kind of like that mental the mental aspect of running where you recognize like, okay, I have this goal in mind, and so I need to arrange things in my life to fit those goals, which those goals kind of inherently begin to, I would say, kind of like seemingly kind of improve your life, and improve like your body and your experience in life, just from relying on running and kind of like shaping many aspects of your life around running. So I love that. And I hope anyone listening can kind of see like, hey, running, not just for the Olympians, okay?
Yeah.
It can be for you as well. So I also want to go back to your experience with lupus and your diagnosis. Because you mentioned that it sounded like you started distance running in college, and I'm not sure of the timeline, but I'm assuming after you started distance running was when you were diagnosed. So if you could maybe elaborate or take us through what your road to your diagnosis was, and how that connects to running, because from what I understand, and definitely please correct me if I'm wrong, from what I understand, lupus may be one of those conditions that maybe misdiagnosed for a while or not necessarily recognized as such. So if you could maybe take us on the journey of how you realized that how you became diagnosed with lupus, and what that path and what that journey was, kind of leading up to it.
Yeah. Lupus is definitely one of those things. At least back then, I'm going on 11 years with it. So back then, I got the impression that there wasn't quite like the one test that you could do or the one marker you could look for that say like, hey, this is like a lupus flare up or what have you. I remember I took so many blood tests like over the course of a year and a half. It was very just tiring. I'll come to the future for a little bit. Whereas now, like, of course I still have it, so I still see a rheumatologist. I still do like four blood tests a year just to make sure things are in line. But nowadays, like I think there has been a development in the sense that like when my rheumatologist gets my blood test, like they're able to kind of see where I am as far as inflammation, where I couldn't get as clear of an answer a decade ago. So I had already like started running. I started really like my first fitness journey after I had moved out of the dorms. So it was all now up to me to like cook my own food and buy my own groceries and things like that. So that's really what catapulted it. It's just like taking my health into my own hands. So I was doing what I would say is a pretty good job at this. I think it helped that I loved working out, so it never felt like a chore. So I'm here sort of like, early 20s, feeling really good, having that college experience, super excited about it. And then things just started feeling like really off. Like it felt like it was coming out of nowhere. My first indication was just like my own temperature regulation was off. I remember there's a summer where I was commuting to campus to take a course. And this is Long Beach, so it's not ever really like burning hot, but like even in the summer we have those warm days. And I remember stepping out of my apartment on one of these days and like my hands just got super cold. Like didn't know what was happening, but abnormal enough for me to like take note of it. Like this is not what normally happens, as I'm standing in the sun and all this stuff. So, my hands went back to normal and I was like, maybe it's just a fluke. Then it started happening more frequently. So it went from like temperature regulation to just bone ache. So there would be mornings where like I was so tense and so tight that I literally had to wait for my body to relax before I could get out of bed because it was too painful. So I went to like my bone stuff. Then I started having like the actual like inflammation and swelling like in my legs. And again, out of nowhere, I would be walking through campus and suddenly my legs would feel like lead. And I look down, I'm just like retaining so much water. Have no idea what's going on. So talking about how hard it was to diagnose, like my first diagnosis that I got was juvenile arthritis because of the joint issues. Right. And so they were like, well, that's the only thing that makes sense with what's going on. But as my symptoms progress, it's like, okay, maybe it's not this. I actually went to like the school health center at first just because I was, didn't know where else to go. And they're the ones that said it's potentially juvenile arthritis. But so I'm going on like a year or so. There's a day where I go back to my mom's to like get my hair done. So we're unbraiding and rebraiding. And she's like, oh, you're like missing a chunk of hair back here. Did you know? I was like, no, I did not know. So somewhere along the way, I also lost some of my hair. And so at that point, I think that's when I started to go to like the community clinics a bit more, especially on mornings where like I was feeling sick or the joint stuff felt like it was getting worse. And the unfortunate thing was like I didn't feel heard. It's like I had to constantly keep going back and keep going back. And I'm just like, I know the blood tests say this, but I don't feel really good. Like, I don't feel really good. I don't feel really good. Over and over again. And like, one day I started noticing that like, my hands were, like the tips of my hands were turning black. And I was like, okay, like they have to let me in now. Like there's no way you can deny something is wrong. I was denied like the first two times that I went to the ER at this point because I was just like, I don't feel good. That third time that I went back is when I was finally admitted, just because naturally, of course, because I had gone untreated, my hands were getting worse. And that's what their main concern was. It was just like the fact that I was in danger of like losing my fingers and all this stuff. Like at that point, they couldn't tell what was going on internally, but like as long as they had like a clear visual clue that something was wrong, like that's what prompted me getting admitted to that hospital. And that's where I eventually got diagnosed too. So it's like I found out I had a blood clot at that point. It's like a year and a half later. So I have no idea when it like actually occurred. But like, yeah, so I'm in the ICU. I've got to do these procedures that identify the blood clot. And then we got to figure out like, what is a treatment pattern for the lupus? And again, this is a year and a half. So my whole system was off. And the only way to treat it at that point was just to do chemotherapy to just kind of attack the whole system and try and calm everything down. And so I'm 22 at this point, just diagnosed, and this is the summer before I I was supposed to go back for, I think, what's going to be like my last year. And so all those plans kind of went out the window too. I remember kind of like sitting on a hospital bed. I'm like, oh, I want to be a physical therapist, which requires my hands. But my hands really hurt a lot, and they're still, I'm still not great with temperature. Like, is this going to be the career path that really pans out? So I really just sort of made it my goal to at least graduate and then figure out anything that I needed to do after. I took a semester's break from school for that first part of the chemotherapy because I was just really tiring. If anybody's ever gone through chemotherapy, it's, I would say, the worst thing, one of the worst things ever. And then to be going through it in like your early 20s, it's just like, it's like, what's up, what's down, what does your life look like? Nothing
Right.
in the cards at all. But so of course that really put a stop to just physical activity and exercise in general. Like I had recently kind of looked back at my old like training logs or what have you on the apps that I used to run, and you can tell just like when all of this was happening. It's just like I went from like a pretty regular schedule to the year I was diagnosed. I think I had only managed to run like 200 something miles in the whole year, all pre-diagnosis, of course. The year after that, it was just like barely a blip because I wasn't doing much. And then you can sort of see like after I got into remission how things started to pick back up. So just kind of having that visual history is always super helpful for me because I can see like where I was into a clear trend into like where I am now. And after getting into remission, that's when I really started talking to my rheumatologist and my doctors about like engaging in physical activity again because I needed their okay. But once I got that clearance, it was just like it wasn't like off to the races, obviously, but that's when I decided to like, yeah, I to go back to the gym to work out and to start running around the campus again. And I made it a goal just to run a mile and then picking up from there. So, like I said earlier, it was very much starting from ground zero and like learning how to walk again, and a body that has been out of that movement and fitness level for 2 years at that point. Very hard to restart, but running was just again like something that I could control. I didn't need a gym membership. I already had some shoes. I just wore old t-shirts really. So I wasn't like trying to go crazy with the restart, but it's something that I could do, something that I could track for myself. And I decided to use my progression in running as a sign for my progression in health.
Yes, so I really appreciate you kind of taking us through your journey as someone who has also um, received a pretty significant health diagnosis a couple years ago, which I haven't talked about a ton publicly at all. But I think one of the things that people often don't realize or don't necessarily pay deference to is like the emotional aspect of how all of these things are happening and what's going on, and that feeling of losing control
Mm-hmm.
of your body and not knowing what your body is doing. So if you could, maybe could you speak to like the the emotional aspect that you've kind of navigated as someone who is living with lupus, and maybe the connection between running and lupus and your emotional well-being?
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely right in that. Like, even when you are in remission or, your labs are coming back normal, to me, it's sort of like just knowing that you have the thing can sometimes just be enough to bring you down one day, in that space of unknown. Um, and again, like even though again you feel generally healthy, at least my experience with lupus is like I still have periods where like there's like sort of that malaise and you don't quite know what's going on, but you still just kind of need to like keep pushing and move forward, and you hope nothing like big comes out of that too. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a constant struggle. And for me, it made me really learn how to get in tune with my body. So in the same way that I had to advocate for myself, like during diagnosis, when I felt something was wrong, it's just like I had to learn to really listen and accept what was going on, like in my own body, and to be able to know when I did need to make an appointment to go to a doctor, and to learn the difference between like this is sort of normal and like if I just maybe take a break, it'll pass. And that's sort of like translated into running, where it's like running. I think people might find it odd that running is what helped me, when running is also like can be a really big cause of inflammation.
Mm.
And so I mean, I recognize that like maybe it's the way that I am very future oriented. So I'm always sort of thinking of this like I'm going to make it because I see it in my head. Um, and so yeah, with running, it's like, yeah, I know like it could have very big potential downsides for me, but it's just like I'm willing to weigh out the benefits as opposed to the risks. Um, and so just like in like if anyone that has ever like done a half or done a marathon, it's just like you really start to learn what feels good and what doesn't, when to stop and when to keep going. I think it becomes just like, yeah, it becomes sort of like ingrained in you in the process of training. So I think like having autoimmune condition sort of like makes that tenfold for me, because it's like I'm not just paying attention to how my body's feeling in training, I'm paying attention to how I'm recovering. I'm paying attention to like any lingering fatigue, and I'm letting that also guide that running journey.
Mm. Would you say that running um, has or does kind of help you build trust with your body?
Definitely. Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really important for, I think, the audience to hear, is that this embodied practice of running simultaneously serves to kind of help you and allow you to check in with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
even while there may be aspects of your body and your physical being that may kind of feel outside of your control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, in addition to running, what does self care, or what can self care look like for someone who has an autoimmune condition and is trying to kind of manage daily life and responsibilities and bills and just all of
Mm-hmm.
the things? Like,
Yeah.
could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think my thoughts around that have had to change since I like took on the entrepreneur life full time. Like definitely if I was working like 9 to 5 and all that, like it was definitely easier to disconnect and stuff because you weren't working on the weekends or trying to manage all
Mm-hmm.
these different things. So one thing I've been trying to practice, or I guess maybe a mantra that I've made for myself, is like I keep trying to tell myself that I want to be like the entrepreneur that quote unquote does it differently. Like it could be very easy for me to lean into the grind culture and to work those late hours and stuff like that. But I'm like, I know that's going to backfire on me sooner than it would for most people because of the autoimmune stuff. So I'm really trying to lean into just like having set hours. That is self care for me. It is going in with a plan and a schedule and sticking to it. It is making sure I have a cutoff time in the evening so that I go have dinner with my partner. It is making sure I can have a day off so that I'm, again, either with my partner or like my nephew who is just born, like spending time with my family. I'm still figuring out the pieces. But of course I'm still like fantasizing about like, oh, a spa day would be like the ultimate
Yes,
self-care.
always a spa
Um
day.
but then the day to day, it's just like caring about my work and myself enough to have to make the schedule and stick to it, to make sure that I'm still going out on a run in the morning, keeping good food around, which is another story, but keeping good food
Mm-hmm.
around. um and then yeah, even like again leaning into that entrepreneur life, it's just like I will take vacations. Like I've told myself like I'm not going to be the one that thinks things are going to fall apart because I took a break. Like I am actively looking to like go to someplace new, plan ahead. I'm still an athlete myself, so I know I have races to travel to on the calendar, and I know that's going to be a time where I'm just like, hey, I'm not available this weekend and I'm just doing my own thing.
Yes, I appreciate that. And like the practical kind of like strategies that you gave us there, like making sure that you are having a clear cutoff time for when you are working, having those adequate boundaries, thinking about different types and different forms of self care, like social self care, like part
Hmm.
of what you see as self care and what you do for self care is spending time with your family, your nephew. So I really appreciate that perspective. And it really aligns well with what I am constantly like trying to promote on the podcast, which is, self-care. We're not going to promote capitalist productivity aspirations. We are going to prioritize rest and getting more out of life other than just like being productive and completing things because we need to check off some capitalistic box. But rest is an important part of our lives. Having a social life is an important aspect of life. So just kind of trying to promote this idea of self-care really being important, as well as there is more to life than us just working, earning money, not having any boundaries as far as living our lives and work. So I really appreciate that perspective. So when you're working with clients, so as a running coach, specializing in working with individuals who have autoimmune disorders, what are some tips and strategies or suggestions that you may have for other folks who have autoimmune conditions and want to get into running? And or what are some particular tips and strategies and things you keep in mind when you are working with clients as a running coach?
Yeah. I think first would be to know that there's no one way to run. And I think that especially applies to autoimmune folks, especially if they've already had an athletic history like me, and then that got interrupted and now they're trying to restart. I think like there's not a lot of resources online that caters specifically to restarting for the autoimmune athlete. So what I see a lot of the times is just like they want to pick it back up where they were prior to diagnosis. Sometimes that can work for folks, but a lot of times I've seen that it doesn't. So being curious and open enough to try different ways to restart, whether that's like a walk run method, maybe that's like if you were running by miles before, you try running by time. And again, starting from square one, let's like maybe your first one is just around the block and not so much like going out to a track or all this to do a workout. It's never going to be a workout first. It's just you have to relearn what your base is, and that can take time. So yeah, be patient with that process, but know that it might take a few iterations for you to kind of figure out where you are, which will then help us kind of figure out where you can go. So I think with my autoimmune athletes, we do focus a lot on like more of like the journaling aspects of running too. Like I encourage all my athletes to really keep some sort of log. Like we have an online log and stuff to take notes on how they're feeling, but I especially encourage my autoimmune athletes to do that because I want them to just not just pay attention to the run, but going back to what I did, which is like pay attention to how your body's feeling in that moment. Try and compare it to like what is common for the disorder that you have, so we can sort of know that like this is something that might irritate it, or this is something that really feels helpful in the moment, right? And then we're just really just plugging and playing, trying different things. Like, does this interval work for you? How did you feel here? Oh no, that was like you flared up after. Okay, we're gonna back off from that. So it's really trial and error. And it's sometimes it's hard for me to give a clear like you need to do A, B, and C, and you'll be all good. It's just like unfortunately, it's like you got to be ready to like play and trust your body and trust your coach and just willing to be curious and to dig deep. Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about the running journal? Because I find that to be so interesting. My husband is actually like, he's a runner, like a hardcore runner, like not me doing the one little marathon and the 10K almost 10 years ago. No. Like he's hardcore, runs, or yeah. I did have marathon. I think I might have messed up and said marathon, but he's not like me. He's like very committed, gym 6 times a week, running like 100 miles a week or trying to run like 100 miles a week or that's very hardcore. And it's funny because I actually recommended to him like, oh, you should like keep a log of your runs and journal about how you're running. And it was just more so one of those things where I'm just like, so he has it to like refer back to and to recognize like, oh, well, when I did this, I was running faster or I felt better. Having no idea that this was like something that like a professional running coach is recommending. So I feel really like excited about that. I'll have to tell him that. But could you tell me like your like kind of like the purpose or the multiple purposes that a running journal can serve in an autoimmune context as well as just like a general context for runners, and perhaps how it may be beneficial for beginners as well.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking to what you said, it'll always be a good tool to look back on and to see just how far you've come. I always recommend trying to journal as soon as you can after a run when the thoughts are still fresh in your head. There's a Nowadays, a lot of the journey can happen digitally, like on the same app that you use to sort of track your run, which is just fine. There's also a lot of just like physical journals that are geared towards running actually that are out there, but you don't have to get one of those. If you just have like a plain notebook that is your quote unquote running log, that works just as fine. But it's really useful to kind of to sort of capture where you are and who you are in that moment on that day. So I will ask like some prompts that I'll ask to get athletes going is just like one we'll do like technical stuff like your shoes, what you were wearing, did it feel good to run in this, all that stuff, and then we'll go a little bit deeper. Maybe we'll talk about fueling, but mostly we'll talk about like how you felt, how did your body feel pre, during, and post. Did you feel like you if you're journaling after a workout, how did you feel your effort was? Like being really, really truthful about it, because that kind of what helps us figure out like if training is progressing the way we want it to, or if we need to like pull back a little bit. But it's just one of those mindful exercises because running is very action oriented, and a lot of us aren't thinking about like slowing down and really letting it sink in. A lot of it's like, especially if you're like you're a morning runner, you're doing it before work. The whole goal is to get out the door, do it, come back, and go straight to work. There's no pause. And keeping a journey is what really allows for that pause to happen, and really let everything sink in. So I'm always trying to advocate for just like taking a step back, letting things sink in. I also, because running is so action oriented, I think that's where a lot of like that hype and energy comes from, where people are just like always going after the next thing and thinking they have to like beat who they were in the past and things like that. But if you kind of take a moment to reflect and really think about how running is making you feel, I think that has like an opportunity to really change the trajectory of your journey, but also make running a more like meaningful experience.
Mm, yes. Yes, that's really cool. And I love that you incorporate journaling into your practice and your coaching with your clients because I'm sure even long after your time with them as far as like working with them,
Mm-hmm.
um at that particular point in time, I'm sure that running journal and getting into the practice of logging your runs and things like that is something like tangible as well that they
Mm-hmm.
have to refer back to improve and to just kind of do that pause that you mentioned that a lot of us who have been runners um, maybe don't do because I think you're exactly right. It is very much one of those things, or at least for me, it was like, okay, let me get this run out the way. But however accomplished I feel, it was very much, let me just get this run out the way. So
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that. So, um, thinking about something that you said really struck me when you talked about your clients, kind of, I guess, to rephrase, like kind of having this frame of reference for what they used to do with running and physical activity versus like the present moment and perhaps like trying to kind of live within the reality of a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak to the mental and emotional aspects of running with an autoimmune condition and how you support your clients through those challenges?
Yeah, I think I'll start with a story first. So, So I had been in remission for like 9 years or so. And then back in 2022 is when I started to not feel well again. Um, and I've had like minor flare-ups, throughout the years and things like that. Went away pretty quickly. But something felt different about this time, and I knew something was different because it started to affect my run. Running got painful again. Had the swelling, water retention, and all that. And that was kind of like my indication that like I was probably heading for a bigger flare up. And sure enough, the labs revealed the same thing. So it was back to like getting on the heavier medications and things like that. And then this time I'm like watching my run performance go down after pretty much hitting like being the fittest I had been, so it's just like it felt night and day. And I remember really, really struggling with it. One, because it was so unexpected. Like I could not, I had never imagined like having a really big flare up again since diagnosis. Like I was like, I'm doing what I can. I'm eating right. I'm exercising. Like I should be good. So just like the fact that it was able to happen really threw me off. And then the fact that I didn't have running for a bit to like help with it also really threw me off. And I have found like going from like the athlete that, had hit these PRs and done these races to someone that was questioning like whether or not like or how we'll get through this. Like uh the identity of a runner is really what I struggled with. Cause I thought like if I'm not out there training like I used to, if I'm not out there racing like I used to, am I still a runner? So that took a lot of probably about a year's worth of introspection before I came to the conclusion that yes, of course I'm still a runner, just because I'm not like competing at the same level. But post that flare up, of course it felt like starting over a little bit too, right? And it's just like I had to be comfortable with letting go of that old story. And on the flip side, also knowing that there was still so much ahead. Like I wasn't starting from scratch really. Like I had years of experience in this. Like I knew what would work and what wouldn't. It was just about getting back out there. It's the most important thing. I think like once we have another hiccup like that, it's really easy to let it like derail us completely, and maybe we never get back into the sport. But the having the courage to like get up and just basically start all over again and be okay with starting over and like writing a new story for yourself. That's the sort of like lived experience that I like to relate to my athletes. It's just like I have been where you are like twice at this point. And it wasn't easy the first time, it wasn't easy the second time, but if I can kind of show you the power of running and how you can use it on your own journey to get to your next goal or just to be active and healthy again, like just like give me a chance to do that, right? And so it's sort of this I found that like the athletes come to me like maybe they've read an article or read a story or things like that, and it's just like I hear, you'd be surprised how often I hear like I didn't know that there was someone out there that like did this, like that had the diagnosis and then went on to still like do marathons and stuff with that. So just knowing that there's someone out there that's done what they wish they can do or what they want to do is just like the biggest thing. And then also I'm someone that can validate their stories. It's like I have been through that journey of diagnosis. Like it is as horrible as you prescribed it, and I'm sorry you had to do that, but I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you at least like took your health and yourself seriously enough to seek that diagnosis too. So always commending them for that, and just kind of like being in their corner. Like they all we have really sometimes is like the doctors and maybe our partners and family members that support us, but maybe not someone in the running world or like that is into this sort of hobby or what have you that can relate. So being able to make that connection into something as like connective as running, I think ends up being quite a big deal.
Yes. I wanted to kind of highlight something that you said when you talked about like running identity and
Mm-hmm.
kind of the relationship to a running identity when you maybe are not able to be as active as you want. Running identity, just from my general research, they've done studies where they have seen that runners who actually identify as runners, they are more likely to commit to the sport. They're more likely to be they're more likely to continue with running, particularly when there are challenges. So I just wanted to just kind of flag that and highlight that. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize how important that is, like really developing that running identity. And I just think about it from the perspective of living with an autoimmune condition, and that potentially kind of complicating or unsettling that running identity, particularly when running is something that is beneficial for your emotional health, is beneficial for keeping you grounded in all of these different areas of your life. So I think that piece about your running identity, I think that's one that is really important. And I think anyone who's listening, if you are considering becoming a runner, or if you are already a runner, finding ways to kind of strengthen your running identity just on a fundamental level, no matter what your body is doing, I think that can be something that's really beneficial, just in general. So thank you for sharing that. So I wanted to just kind of bring us a little bit, kind of full circle to a degree. So you mentioned that you were diagnosed, was it 11 years ago, did you say?
Yes.
10, 11 years ago? 11 years ago. So this can be within the context of your diagnosis. It can be within the context of running, or it can just be within the context of your life in general. But my question for you is, if you could send a message to yourself 10 years ago, what would you say and why?
Good one. Trust yourself. I think it would be trust yourself. Because looking back, I remember like being diagnosed, being a time where I had the opportunity to pivot. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I made a good pivot, but I could have maybe pivoted a little harder into finally being able to do like what it is that I wanted, instead of again following that quote unquote career path. But I'd say, yeah, trust yourself. Don't be afraid to do what's really calling to you back then.
Yes. What do you think you yourself 10 years ago would have said, or how do you think you would have received that advice?
There would have been some hesitancy. Yeah, because there's always that fear of like stepping outside of your comfort zone. That was a big one. Um, yeah, even though like, I just back then I was just like, let me just finish my degree and, see what happens after. That could have been a point where I said, I actually don't want to be a physical therapist. There was opportunities to pivot, but like stepping out of the comfort zone, or feeling like I was like throwing away years of work just to get there would have probably been what held me back. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think it's really cool that you still ended up in a profession where you are very conscious of health, and you are coaching people on ways to become better runners, as well as kind of improving their health and their lives kind of holistically. And I think that is a testament, as well as like your path may not necessarily look predictable or straight, and like it is like everything is coming together in a way for your greater good. But I think your journey is definitely a testament to trusting yourself and finding your way to a place and a career that allows you to like use your education, but also incorporate like your love for running and your passion in a way that helps people. And I think that is really cool. And I have loved this conversation. I know it is going to help so many people who may be interested in running, but may not necessarily be sure, because they're not living up to this kind of like image in their heads of what a runner is supposed to be or look like, as well as people who have been diagnosed with certain conditions, and recognizing that my mom always says, like, you are the captain of your own ship. And so within that, I think about it from the perspective of we have challenges. As someone, I don't have an autoimmune condition, but have definitely had like a diagnosis that was pretty life changing, although I'm fine now. I think one of the things that can be taken from this conversation is that yes, we may have things that we have to like navigate, like physically, and of course like the relationship between navigating things physically and then the mental implications. But I think this emphasis on self-care and this emphasis on listening to your body and engaging with practices, well-being practices that help you do that, become more attuned to your body, be more mindful of your holistic health. I think that is something that could be taken from this conversation, and I'm sure that the audience will gain a lot from this conversation. So thank you so much, Mireille. This has been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So let everyone know where we can find you. Of course, I'm going to put everything in the show notes. If you are listening to the podcast, if you're watching the video, I will put all of her information in the description box, but let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, I'm definitely most active on Instagram. My handle is at Hey Coach Mireille. You can also find more information about coaching through my website at coachbymireille.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Mireille. I really appreciate it, and it has been a joy talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.